Whether social Darwinian or not, Hitler and the Nazis definitely believed in eugenics. For example, from now on, marriage between Jews and pure Aryan Germans would be forbidden. In fact, none of the sterilisation programs set up by various countries around the world, USA, Scandinavia, etc., were a patch on the Nazis after they came to power in 1933. Early on, they introduced the law for the prevention of hereditarily diseased offspring, which resulted in upwards of 300,000 people being compulsorily sterilised, schizophrenics, epileptics, and many other defectives. But they took eugenics much further than that. In fact, they moved it into the realms of euthanasia, with programs designed to exterminate the unfit, a class of people that included not only communists, criminals, homosexuals, lovers of jazz, but more importantly, the mentally ill, the gypsies, and of course the Jews. We tend to remember the Jews because of the horrific and unprecedented scale of the slaughter. Over 6 million were murdered in the final solution, or died as victims of disease and starvation in filthy labour camps. Indeed, the Nazis were almost successful in their attempt to exterminate the European Jewish population. But less well remembered is the murderous programme that preceded the final solution. Action T4, implemented in 1939, was an attempt to rid Germany of life unworthy of living, as the Nazis called the mentally unfit. That things were headed this way could be seen by the propaganda posters, which basically argued a similar line to that put forward by Davenport in the USA. The mentally ill and other degenerates were not just a burden on the biological future of the nation, but they were also a drag upon prosperity. In late 1939, Hitler signed the Euthanasia Decree, which was instituted by his Chief of Chancellery, Philipp Bühler, and his physician, Karl Brandt. As the decree read, they were given the responsibility of extending the authority of physicians designated by name, so that patients who on the basis of human judgment are considered incurable can be granted mercy death after a definitive diagnosis. That was a quote. This gave the medical profession considerable power in terms of deciding who should live and who should die. Ultimately, it would cost Brandt his life, as this was part of the case raised against him at the doctor's trial at Nuremberg after the war. The ground had been laid earlier in 1938 with the creation of the Committee for the Scientific Registering of Hereditary and Congenital Illnesses, which established a register of defectives who inevitably ended up being killed. Brandt was in charge of this process too. With the implementation of the T4 programme, extermination centres were set up in and around psychiatric hospitals in Germany, including at the Schloss Hartheim, where over 18,000 patients were killed. Various methods of killing were trialled, including the use of gas, a technology that was successful and that was transferred to the extermination camps. Action T4 was officially terminated in 1941, but the euthanasia went on in psychiatric institutions and elsewhere, and we all know how it ended up. The doctor's trial at Nuremberg revealed the full extent of the medical professionals' collusion in Hitler's efforts. A profession that was dedicated to healing had become perverted by the evil of Hitler's biopolitics. This was thanatocracy, the rule of death brought to an extreme. And people who had cast aside their profession's credo of first do no harm rushed to implement a range of measures that were inhumane. In the labour camps and the death camps, medical professionals conducted horrific experiments upon Jews, political opponents and others. These included immersing the victims in freezing water for extended periods, depriving victims of oxygen, poisoning them with gas, inflicting wounds and deliberately infecting them to see how they might be treated. Operations without anaesthetic, inhumane bone grafts. The list goes on and on. Again, how was it possible that the noble profession of medicine had forgotten itself so badly that it was prepared fully to participate in Hitler's thanatocracy. At the doctor's trial, Brand would raise the defence along with the other accused that all they were doing was an extension of what was going on elsewhere. In terms of euthanasia, surely it was only a small step from the policies that were being deployed in the USA and elsewhere. The experimentation that was being carried out on prisoners in the USA were also raised as part of the defence, while the more utilitarian line that the experiments were conducted to save the life of German military personnel was also used. None of this persuaded the judges at Nuremberg. In Brandt's case, he was sentenced to death and hanged for his crimes. One wonders how his defence would have run had he known about the Tuskegee experiment that was taking place while Brandt was on trial. There, a group of African Americans who had been diagnosed with syphilis were being monitored to uncover the natural history of syphilis. The experiment had started in the 1930s, but by 1947, syphilis was recognised as treatable using antibiotics. Regardless, the experiment went on, and the subjects remained untreated. Some would go on to develop tertiary syphilis, a horrible condition that usually ends in madness and then an excruciating death. And the experiment was only terminated in the early 1970s when the media found out about it. The difference is in quality, not kind. Undoubtedly, we should regard Brandt's actions as a vile betrayal of the Hippocratic tradition, but so too those medical practitioners who oversaw Tuskegee. These things happen when some people's lives are valued less than the lives of others. Jews, African Americans, gypsies, all regarded as racially inferior, and their fate sealed by a rationale that appeared to contain elements of Darwinism. So, was Bowler right to attempt to exculpate Darwinian thinking and see the behaviour of the Nazis or Tuskegee physicians as being an inevitable result of forces that predated Darwin's theory and would have developed along similar lines with or without natural selection and the struggle for survival? Or should we follow Weikart in thinking that Darwinism had so devalued human life as to allow such horrors to happen?